I'm a civil engineer by training, and I've specialised in traffic and transport, and I've been very, very fortunate to be invited into your community to give you some advice about how active transport can kind of meet some of your community objectives. And what I'm talking about today is an active transport strategy that we've developed for council, which the officers are currently going through, and will get refined before it gets put in front of the councillors for sign-off and potential inclusion inside your LTP, and the timing and process for how that funding will go forward. So look, in the time-honoured tradition of tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them, this is what I'm going to be speaking about today. So why bother about active transport? Why is it important? And what makes a great active transport city? And could Gisborne be part of a great active transport process? And how are we going to achieve this kind of outcome? And ultimately, when might we achieve it? So talking about why bother, I'm going to get a little bit personal about this conversation, right? So I'm going to talk about dependency in your community. So this came out of the Megatrends report that got released this year for council, and this talks about children less than 15 years old, older people greater than 64 years of old, and not my words, but their words, extreme old age, right? Greater than 80 years of age. Right? Now, what's interesting from this particular figure is I'm not there. I can tell you, I'll let you in, I'm 43, which means that I won't turn up till around about 2036. Have you ever had that experience of looking back 20 years and going, gosh, it felt like only yesterday? Okay? Well, when you look forward 20 years, it seems to be a habit of humans. We go, we can't imagine that far out, it's too far out. But if you can twist it upside down and say, well, in fact, 20 years ago was like yesterday. 20 years tomorrow will just be like tomorrow. Okay? So have a look at this and think about where you are, and the fact that when you do turn up on one of these graphs, think about active transport, which is people being able to cycle and walk, right, as basically looking after yourself, your self-interest, in, for my example, in 20 years' time, when I'm going to need more transport choice. Okay? Try and also have a look at that blue line, which is the children's line going down. Okay? So, and then when you couple this with this, this is population growth for Gisborne urban area, and in 20 years' time, this is where I'll be. But I'm not going to be saved by the young people in this community, because proportionately there's going to be less of them as I look around. So when you're out walking tomorrow, and you will be walking somewhere tomorrow, look around at the people around you, and you will sit there and go, and there's going to be less young people. Okay? So this is about self-interest. Thinking about your communities and how they're designed and how they're going to provide more active transport and more choice for you as an individual, because I'm going to want that choice too. So what about active transport, and how does that fit into Gisborne? Look, a couple of months ago we sat around in this room with a group of stakeholders, and we said, well, look, what does active transport mean for the groups that you represent? And we got some really good feedback out of that. And a really key messaging out of that was road safety. Road safety is a reason or a perception for why there isn't more active transport happening in the community today. And we also found out that active transport around children was really important, and also active transport for older people, so that there's more choice for how you get around and ease of getting around. It shouldn't be hard. Right? We actually want to have, you know, that as dependent people seen, because if they're not seen, then we need to be inclusive. So we got some good feedback about road safety as being a perception for why people don't get involved in active transport. So here's some figures. Right? So this is 2005 to 2009. I really want to point your attention to the two top bars. Gisborne is represented in the deep black line in the middle. Now, proportionately, Gisborne does not fare well for walking and cycling in terms of road safety deaths. The cyclist one is particularly important because where those stars turn up, that means it's statistically significant. You're away from your peer group, and your peer group is other similar sized cities, and you're in that dotted line, and the rest of New Zealand is in the yellow line. So cycling, you're particularly poor, and pedestrians, you're a bit higher, but not statistically significant. But when you actually have a look at pedestrians, you're particularly skewed to causing casualties at particularly young people, and those less than around about 15 years of age. Okay? Now that's for walking, and when you have a look at cycling, this is the one that's statistically significant as a whole group. But then when you have a look at that in terms of age groups, you're particularly good at cyclists dying on your roads. Okay? And that wasn't, compared to your peer group, you're an outlier. But in terms of the working group that we had here in this room, in fact, we were getting that feedback. They didn't need to see these numbers to actually know what was the vibe going on in the community. But look, all is not lost for road safety and where you are for active transport. So this compares Gisborne just here, and this graph shows cycling mode split vertically, so higher is better, and this is journey to work, this is our Census New Zealand stuff, and then crash rate horizontally. So a higher crash rate is worse, a better crash rate, which is a lower number, is towards me. And what it shows you that there are other New Zealand cities that actually have good mode split and their crash rate isn't quite as high. If you get more people doing active transport, this is for cycling, you actually win both ways because you start going up because you've got a higher mode split and because you've got more people choosing that mode through an effect of journeys and peoples and numbers, you'll actually start moving to the left as well. So more people walk and cycle, it's safety in numbers. The other thing that comes out of active transport is you don't have a climate that supports active transport. And I can tell you that in terms of Gisborne's climate, you're actually very, very good. You're not wet. Right? You're particularly you're not a cold climate. In fact, you're a particularly warm climate. And also for cycling, you're actually a very flat topography. So you've got everything going for you to actually be a really good active transport community. So out of that process, we developed a vision for what active transport might be for Gisborne. And we've said that Gisborne should be, cool and innovative. It should be friendly. It should be encouraging of more activity going on, and also for that activity to be accessible, so that people can actually access particular things. And we said that it should cater for residents and also for tourists, visitors that want to come here, and it should have longevity. So it shouldn't just be for tomorrow or the next 5 years, but literally I keep returning to that orange dot. I'm looking after myself on this, so it needs to extend out into the distance. So how might this be achieved? Well, it will mean change. And one of the big changes for your community will be infrastructure. And infrastructure has the benefit of facilitating an outcome, right? It's an enabler to actually enable people to make choices that they otherwise couldn't. There'll be other things as well as infrastructure. There'll be education, there'll be advocacy, there'll be all those types of things. But as part of infrastructure is really important. So here are some examples about how the how might be implemented here. So this comes from Vancouver. It's an intersection, and you'll see that it's an always stop intersection, and for pedestrians it's got zebra crossings on each corner. It's quite a compact intersection. This is a recent intersection improvement in Payton in the UK. This intersection actually used to be a set of traffic signals, right, which have now totally gone, and you'll notice one thing that's really missing from here, which is any road marking whatsoever. Right? But this has been quite successful in this community in terms of actually having a change of focus. This particular intersection has exactly the same capacity as an earlier intersection with traffic signals. It's just that it uses different ways of getting people through this intersection. This is something a little bit more familiar to probably most of you. This is from Hamilton. Right? It's all about design quality for pedestrians, actually having a look at things like how do people cross the road easily, especially for older people. And as we get all older, you're going to go and see more mobility aids getting used in our communities. Because there'll be two things: there'll be more choice of aid, and also there'll be a lot more elderly people. So you're going to see these things happen. Walking is a micro thing. You've got to get the details done properly to actually make sure that people are enabled. Cycling too is going to have a pretty active role. So in terms of the whole of the active transport strategy, we've put together some networks, one based around walking and pedestrians, and we've also come up with an on-road network, which in part is protected. And here's an example of how that might work in practice. So the picture on the left is a typical road. This was in Chicago. And the picture on the right just uses some edge marker posts to delineate space between cyclists and motorists. This is being trialled in New Zealand at the moment. So it's here, and you can actually use this. Here's another example. This is in New York. This is an on-road facility where the parking lane is segregated away from the curb line. There are positives and negatives associated with this, but again, it's about thinking differently. Those treatments when you come to intersections are really, really important. Those poor safety statistics I showed you earlier, a lot of those will be clustered around intersections. Intersections are critical to make sure this works appropriately. And here's one way that you can do different types of cycle protection treatments. And here's another technique for cycling as well, cycle boulevards, which are more on your local streets, which are much more slower speeds and less segregation of mode, much more interaction with vehicles, but much slower speeds, much more friendly and comfortable environment. As part of that network, we've also designed an off-road protected network that goes around the whole of Gisborne City to provide a mechanism to connect around, and then we've got those other routes that connect through and across. So here's an example you'll be very familiar with just outside here. It's a segregated route. I know it's particularly friendly, and I know in this particular instance that it gets used as a promotional exercise as well, to do that promotion of different modes of transport. This is an example in Vancouver. It's a segregated cycle lane on road. Again, it's protected. You've got some great bridges that are here for walking and cycling, and under the network that we've proposed more of these as well, and it's just been spoken around down at the Navigations project. There's more linkages across the river as well. And look, cycling can be quite exciting, and cycling in terms of end-use facilities doesn't need to be dull, and you can have crossovers between public art and also just providing a facility. And I think this is a really great example about the fact that it doesn't need to be dull. It doesn't need to be just an old-style Sheffields thing. So look, here's that's the bigger picture, and that's also about coupling it with education and training, and that means training not just for cyclists, but also for those users that maybe need some mobility aid as well. So look, here's a test of the technology when I go and use some YouTube. So this is an ultimate, at the moment, it's a vision for the future. We already know about the existing work that you've done here, and that's just been spoken about. So this is the Alfred Cox Walkway, which is really successful. You've no doubt tried this yourself, but it's just a fantastic connector from the east to the west, longitudinally. We've also got this beach front walk that goes all the way to the harbour and into the CBD, and then northwards as it crosses up towards Peel Street and over to the other side onto the Botanical Gardens. But looking forward, what we're looking to think about, and these are all proposals, so don't be too worried about the binning of projects into particular years. It's up to date. But we've got some external projects that go around the city. We've obviously got the work out of Wainui, but we do have some questions about how it actually connects into the CBD, and there's pros and cons with both particular routes, and that'll be something that'll have to be fitted out as we go look into a little bit more detail. Different road crossing positions, and also how do you link into your communities. It's not just about heavily trafficked roads, it's actually how do you go from your house all the way to your destination. Particularly focused around schools and businesses, because those are big attractors. Looking further out, we're obviously looking to connect to a lot of the schools that are out to the west, and we know some of the things that we've got to improve around there, around those intersections. Gladstone Road, we're currently talking about a protected route along the spine of the city. And inside the CBD itself, we're throwing around some ideas about having shared space, doing away with any road markings, having a pedestrian-friendly area where people want to spend time and spend money. Lots of upgraded crossings because of that safety issue, and really doing a lot of work around that Elgin area where industry and schools are pretty close proximity. Ultimately heading out to Young Nick's Head. And ultimately finishing up with a whole connected route around the whole of the city. Oh, and the walkway up to Barker's Hill. Well, it's a proposal, but it's up to the community to think about, do you want this time frame to be squished in a bit as you go through your trade-offs? It's ultimately about community decision making and getting feedback on some of these proposals. So this process is about that. We're keen to obviously understand where those balances lie. So as part of this process, it's all about the LTP process and actually putting stuff in front of the councillors ultimately to endorse strategy. I'm here to explain some of the detail, but some of that is really conceptual stuff. And so, we talked about the why bother, and the why bother is all about do it because there's something in it for you, for active transport. What, in terms of, can Gisborne be an active transport city, and the how, so how it might actually be facilitated. And we've talked about the when, and the when at the moment is really a community decision about whether or not you extend out or compact particular projects as you trade off with other projects in your community as well, which have just been spoken about.